So good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Jones, and I'm the Executive Chairman Emeritus of the Atlantic Council. Thank you all for coming to today's very important event, Security and Stability in the Black Sea Region, hosted in partnership with one of the leading institutions of higher learning in Romania, the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration, which is the Atlantic Council's esteemed partner for Black Sea security work. We convene today as crises cascade across the world. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine continues to threaten peace and stability in Europe, long taken for granted. The ongoing war between Israel and Hamas is compounding regional conflicts and global tensions. Furthermore, the potential remains for China to possibly take military action against Taiwan at some point, undermining the rules-based international system across multiple regions on the globe. With the world in an increasingly uncertain and more dangerous place, maintaining a robust transatlantic relationship is more essential now than perhaps ever. The Black Sea region is of particular importance for the security and stability of the Euro-Atlantic. Over the last decade and a half, if not longer, the Black Sea region has been at the center of Europe's most intense confrontations and violent conflicts. For too long, Russia's authoritarian leader has been pounding this region relentlessly, aiming to make it the soft underbelly of European security. His illegal invasion of Ukraine, dating back to the 2014 annexation of Crimea, is just the most obvious example. He has invaded Georgia, he's fomented conflict in Moldova, and acted as a destabilizing and malign force, harassing ships and aircraft operating across the Black Sea. Russia leverages the full spectrum of hybrid warfare across the region, including trade and energy embargoes, cyber attacks, information warfare, and even sabotage and assassination. To address this aggression, the transatlantic community must develop a comprehensive and assertive strategy for the Black Sea region, requiring military, diplomatic, energy, and economic elements, just to name a few. Alongside the efforts spearheaded by the U.S. Department of State to provide a strategy to Congress by June 2023, the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, in partnership with SNSPA, conducted a task force to develop our own recommended security strategy for the Black Sea. I was pleased to serve as task force co-chair alongside with General Curtis Scaparrotti for this effort. The strategy was published in December of 2023, shortly before President Biden signed the National Defense Authorization Act for 2024 into law. We were very pleased to see that 2024 NDAA included Section 1247 titled Black Sea Security and Development Strategy, directing the development of an interagency strategy with a critical focus on security in the region. I look forward to learning more about the strategy's development, and I encourage all to consider the recommendations put forth in the previously published Atlantic Council report. Without question, the United States remains an indispensable part of the regional security equation, and a comprehensive strategy in the Black Sea region requires continued U.S. engagement. I'm encouraged to see this renewed focus on the Black Sea region. I believe it will be an integral part of the 2024 NATO summit in Washington later this summer. After 75 years of NATO, this summer summit will be immensely consequential for the future of transatlantic security. The next 2 months will help set the stage for the summit, making key convenings among allies and partners, such as this one, all the more timely. Today's convening is part of our broader campaign of analysis and programming to prepare for this crucial NATO summit taking place in less than 60 days. So I encourage all of you to stay tuned for more from the Atlantic Council in the coming weeks. Convenings on topics such as this are integral to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and the world. The Center honors General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership and cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, I'd like to remind everyone that this event is on the record. Today's discussion will be moderated by Ms. Laura Kelly, Foreign Policy Reporter at The Hill. Later in the discussion, we encourage the audience to direct any questions using the microphone stand and virtual participants to use askac.org. Before beginning the panel discussion, I turn to the stage to our partner, Dr. Remus Prikopy, for virtual remarks. Remus has extensive experience as a teacher and manager in the field of education. He previously served as Romania's Minister of Education from 2012 to 2014, and currently serves as the Rector and President of the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration. Remus, over to you.
Thank you, General Jones. Hi, everyone. From the beginning, I would like to appreciate the event which Atlantic Council has organized in order to discuss about the work of Atlantic Council and CNSPA in the last year and a half on the Black Sea strategy. This is a very important, I would say, vital topic in Romania for a very simple reason. The noise of the Russian war in Ukraine can be heard from Romanian borders. Russia last year attacked by drones different Ukrainian ports 200 meters away or 300 meters away from Romanian borders. So this topic of Black Sea security is not just a topic of specialists, of academics, or of politicians. It's a topic which is discussed daily in mass media, and it's highly on the agenda of Romanian population. So for this reason, I am really happy Atlantic Council and CNSPA have worked for a couple of years on this topic, mainly, and General Jones knows very well because he was keynote speaker during our annual conference organized by my university, National University of Political Studies and Public Administration, Bucharest Security Conference. And many years ago, 2016, 2017, 2018, my colleagues and our guests to the Bucharest Security Conference signaled the fact that after Georgia 2008, after Crimea 2014, to have a classical war in Europe, it's no longer just a theoretical option for Russia. Unfortunately, it happened. And also, I am happy Atlantic Council and CNSPA, based on the, I would say, encouragement of Romanian embassy in Washington, D.C., Ambassador Muraru, previously Ambassador Mayor, signed an agreement, a framework agreement, to work in a coordinated way on the Black Sea issue. President of Atlantic Council, Fred Kamp, and myself, we signed December 1st, 2021, an agreement to work on this topic. And once again, when we had a public event in the Atlantic Council headquarters, we said Black Sea, it's unfortunately a hot sea. And today it is having a classical and real war, and also a lot of tension around. So I would like to appreciate the work of Atlantic Council, the fact that they, for many years, accepted to work with us, with our professors, Professor Pașcu, Professor Sekareș, former Minister of Defense, former president of our university on this topic. And also the younger generation of academics are now working with you. And I'm happy both Andrei Moraru and Iulia Puiu, who besides their different positions, they are also professor in SNSPA. SNSPA is the acronym of the long name of my university. I'm happy also this agreement between SNSPA and Atlantic Council was mentioned last week during the Atlantic Council gala. Fred Kamp mentioning this from the podium, and also President Iohannis discussing about the importance of our work during our different side events. So once again, I would like to appreciate the work of everyone involved in this partnership. Before to conclude, I was very happy to see the delegation of Atlantic Council last year. I think it was June last year, a delegation led by Richie Hooker, who is the main author of the strategy, to see not just the opinion of my colleagues from SNSPA, but also of different politicians, but to go to Cogălnicianu military airport. And I know, and once again, I'll mention General Jones. I know from our discussions, General Jones saw the potential of Cogălnicianu airport, military airport, in a moment when Romanian government was about to shut down the airport. Today, the vision of General Jones, the support of Romanian Ministry of Defense, at that moment, General Ciucă, today former Prime Minister and President of the Senate, so they together succeeded to reverse the decision of the Romanian government and not to shut down Cogălnicianu Airport, which is strategic to assure the security of the Black Sea region. In fact, is mentioned also in the report, but to be a place where both Romanian government and United States decided to invest a lot in order to have one of the best military facility in the region. So thank you once again, and I'll be here participating to the discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Pricopi, and thank you, General Jones, for your opening remarks. My name is Laura Kelly. I cover foreign policy for The Hill, and I'll just set the scene as we're talking about the Black Sea. It is bordered by Ukraine to the north, Russia to the northeast, and NATO allies and partners to the south and west. The security of the Black Sea region has gained new appreciation and focus because of its economic, geopolitical, and military importance, and made all the more stark because of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And against this backdrop, we would hope the Black Sea will be a major focus for discussion for leaders convening here in Washington, D.C. this July for the NATO summit. We can hope. And this makes today's discussion immensely timely and relevant. And today's conversation will discuss the Atlantic Council's report, A Security Strategy for the Black Sea. And we will consider the bilateral security relationship between the U.S. and Romania and examine the importance of the region for both European and global stability. I'd like to introduce some of our panel of experts. I'm going to go through their qualifications quite quick so we can get into the discussion. So it is definitely not an exhaustive list of their expertise. I'm joined by Richard Hooker. Richard is a non-resident senior fellow with the Transatlantic Security Initiative in the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council, author of the report. and former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Europe and Russia with the National Security Council. We have Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow with the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security and leader of the Brzezinski Group. And he was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Europe and NATO Policy from 2001 and 2005. And we are joined virtually by Ms. Yulia Huyu. Yulia is founder and CEO of Great Empowerment Consulting and has been working with leaders and institutions for over 20 years. She served as state advisor to Romanian President Klaus Iohannis and served in the political section of the Embassy of Romania in Washington, D.C. And so I hope we can get into really rich discussion with Rich. I wanted to start actually with a little bit of current state of affairs. And Yulia, I'm going to turn to you first, if you don't mind. I wonder if you can give us your perspective. You're in Bucharest right now. And can we talk about what's happening in Georgia? We see unprecedented protests against this pursuit of a Russian-inspired foreign agents law by the Georgian government. And how does this kind of demonstrate the importance and imperative of the US, NATO allies, Romania, being really focused on the Black Sea region and the countries surrounding it?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here with this esteemed panel, and I want to thank the Atlantic Council and my university, National University for Political Studies and Public Administration, for bringing to the public attention the importance of the Black Sea. And to your point, yes, I think it's everybody begins to see that Black Sea needs to be a geopolitical focus for the United States and for the European and Euro-Atlantic community. See, I was listening to an event that happened a couple of days ago, and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba used this expression, or our desire for the Black Sea to be a sea of NATO. So I think if we look in the future, we have to set out bold objectives, and the Black Sea can become a source of Western values and democracy. And what we see right now in Georgia, what we see in Ukraine, which is also a struggle for democracy, shows that Black Sea is a battleground for democracy. And today in 2024, all over the world, we are in a fight between autocracy and democracy. So with that in the background, we like to say what happens in the Black Sea doesn't stay in the Black Sea. And we can see that the Black Sea impacts not just the European security, but also the global food security and democracy.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Rich, turning to the report, Security Strategy for the Black Sea, it was published in December. I wanted to pull out a few points that I interpreted as common sense ideas, but pose extreme challenges to implement, to say the least, and I'm gonna shorten them, but some of the points that were put in the report: expedite membership for Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia to NATO, withdrawal of Russian forces from areas it occupies in Moldova and Georgia, give the OSCE some teeth, reset relations with Turkey where possible, increase economic, political, and military assistance to Kyiv while stepping up pressure on Russia and its supporters. Again, your report was published in December, and the U.S. didn't deliver support to Kyiv until April.
Right.
So how much harder are these points to achieve given the current state of world affairs and partisan politics in Washington?
Well, from the outset, you know, that's a challenging list of moves or steps to make, no question about that. And there's also no question that Ukraine has been on something of a back foot on the battlefield because of the slowdown in U.S. assistance, among other factors. But I think a key contributing factor is that a number of these Black Sea states, in a sense, have been left outside of the Western community, a little bit in the cold, so to speak. Partly, I think, in all candor, because there was a fear of the Russians becoming upset if NATO moved too aggressively to incorporate them, the EU in the same way. So a number of these states have candidate status, but strenuous conditions have been placed on them before they can be admitted to full status. And to be honest, it does not look like Ukraine, for example, and also Georgia would be admitted to the NATO alliance anytime soon. That leaves them, in a sense, outside of this Western security structure or umbrella, and really complicates their ability to integrate with the West and for the region to stabilize.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And Ian, how do we assess how far behind maybe the U.S. and NATO is in achieving some of these goals when looking at Russia's position? There's this fear of escalation with Russia, Russian malign activity in the region. Has Russian malign activity in the region increased, or has it been kind of put down a little bit because of Ukraine's successes? What's kind of the situation we're seeing?
Well, the situation right now is getting worse, but let me step back a little bit and underscore some of the points my colleagues made. I mean, we're paying a price now for a lack of strategy in the Black Sea region over the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, this is a region of immense importance. I mean, think about it. This is the crossroad between Europe, Eurasia, and the Middle East. Think of all the commerce that used to cross the Black Sea, bringing goods from Central Asia to Europe, energy to Central Asia. Think of the infrastructure, the pipelines and cable lines in the Black Sea. As Yulia pointed out, this is a region with 3 NATO allies, 2 NATO partners, and unfortunately also Russia with its aggressive imperial ambitions. And as she pointed out, not only is it today the primary contact point in the battle between authoritarianism and rabid imperialism and democracy and rule of law, it has been that way for the last 2 decades, for the very reasons General Jones pointed out. Think about the invasion of Georgia in 2008, the 2 invasions of Ukraine, the assassinations and sabotage that have occurred in the region, the harassment of Allied aircraft. This has been going on for a long time. So this is why this report is so important. It's putting on the table some important ideas on how to develop a comprehensive strategy to reassert the protection of our interests in the region. And I would note, this is a report that was chaired by 2 former SACEURs, General Jones and General Scaparrotti. These are gentlemen who have got an immense amount of experience and authority about what our security priorities ought to be. So this is a report that's long overdue, and I hope it will be taken into account as the U.S. administration develops its and presents publicly, I hope, its strategy for the Black Sea region, which is required by law under the last NDA and is due roughly later this summer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And looking ahead to the Biden administration presenting its Black Sea strategy and having to put resources to it, how do we feel about the Biden administration's strength to lean in, to push forward? We've seen them kind of slow walk heavy weapons to Ukraine, and then partisanship always makes these things harder. Maybe each of you could give your assessment of the will of the Biden administration to actually make this a priority. Yeah, let's start with you, Rich.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the Biden administration does deserve credit for the assistance that's been rendered to date. And the 6-month lag, of course, can't be laid at the feet of the administration. The president pushed hard for that. But it's also important, I think, to point out that there have been some key capabilities that the administration, as a matter of policy, have withheld from Ukraine that have made it difficult for them to achieve gains on the battlefield. Probably for fear of what the consequences of a Russian reversal or a Russian defeat might be. That's my guess at any rate. But without, for example, air power and long-range fires, it's very, very difficult on a modern high-intensity battlefield to achieve offensive gains and to recover national territory that the Russians currently occupy. And so long as that is the case, it's going to be very, very difficult to stabilize the Black Sea region. There are other factors that contribute to instability, but by far, in my opinion, the biggest factor has to do with Russian aggression in the region. And in those areas where Russian military forces are not active, Russian malign activity, subversion, and those sorts of things are also deeply destabilizing.
Yeah. And if I may, Yulia, I'll turn to you. From the Romanian perspective, what is the opinion of how the Biden administration is maybe prioritizing or not prioritizing this? And then are there any concerns over a potential Trump administration, or maybe some hopes?
Well, first of all, to build on what my colleague said, I think the Biden administration was really powerful and able to bring together the European allies and the entire democratic world in the support of Ukraine. And this is easy now to overlook, but if we remember at the beginning of the war, I think Putin counted on the fact that the Western world would be divided. And they underestimated the ability of US to provide that kind of leadership. So we have to keep that in mind. I also think the situation got complicated because of the domestic political context. It's always, domestic politics influences foreign policy, and it's having an election year is always challenging. So, but besides that, actually the Biden administration is the first one who caused the breakthrough, let's say, in prioritizing the Black Sea. From my own experience as a former diplomat, I'm not a diplomat anymore. I know my colleagues, both from Romania and also from other Eastern European countries, from the Baltic states and Poland, they've been warning for many years about the Russian threat in the Black Sea and on the eastern flank of NATO. And at times, with some Western countries, there was almost a disbelief that something like this could happen. Unfortunately, our evaluations were accurate. So now it's really great to see that we do have a renewed focus on the Black Sea, and this is part of the U.S. strategy and U.S. foreign policy. And I hope they, like the next years, will bring that. And just to finish this, I don't think Black Sea security and stability should be seen as a partisan matter. It is non-partisan because it impacts Euro-Atlantic community, it impacts NATO, and ultimately it impacts the US.
Okay, thank you. Ian, is there anything you want to add on that question?
Well,
or
two points. One quick one, and I think in response to Yulia, Black Sea security is a bipartisan issue. It is a bipartisan coalition of senators that have been pressing the administration for strategy led by Shaheen and Ricketts, a Democrat and Republican. And on your question about, are we doing enough to help Ukraine defeat the Russian invasion? The answer is no. Could we do a lot more? The answer is yes. And I just pointed just to the imbalance of power between the transatlantic community and Russia. NATO has a GDP of $52 trillion. Russia, less than 2, so 25-time magnitude difference. NATO spends $1.3 trillion on defense. Russia, roughly $88 to $100 million, 10-time difference. It is a real question of political will here at stake. And the West isn't showing the political will necessary to defeat, and to enable Ukraine to defeat this invasion. It's a real question. It's going to be a defining issue for the upcoming NATO summit. We have the capacity, but do we have the will? There's certainly urgency to see that will exercised.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to get to the upcoming NATO summit, but just to follow up on kind of the politics surrounding this, if we do see a second Trump administration, his supporters who say that he has been strong in Europe and strong on NATO with his blustering rhetoric may point to that he would push for NATO allies to burden share more, to take more responsibility in these areas. Are there benefits to that, or are there risks where he may say the U.S. is not going to engage so much in this strategy because we need partner countries over there to do that?
There's no question that Trump's rhetoric on burden sharing probably pushed the Europeans in the right direction, but it came with an enormous cost. Because look at the lack of confidence we see in Europe today in the transatlantic relationship in the United States. You know, my fear, and Rich has a slightly different view on this, is I don't think Trump will immediately go in and trash the transatlantic relationship. It's got too much at stake. We have too much economically at stake, the United States, in our relationship with Europe, $4 trillion of investment. What I am worried about is him coming to office, and as part of his 100-day plan, is to force a peace on Ukraine that will be blatantly unfair and basically giving Putin a victory. That would be a death knell for the transatlantic relationship. It would be a death knell for stability in Europe.
I'm sure, and we could have a full conversation on that. Rich, would you like to respond?
Yeah, to some extent, I think the prevailing narrative is misplaced for the following reason. In 2023, the European allies alone spent about $380 billion on defense. Russia even geared up in a war economy, by the highest estimates, no more than about $125 billion. So the Europeans have spent something like 3 times on defense in recent years compared to Russia. That's a big difference. And yet the prevailing or predominant narrative is that the Europeans are not spending enough. And I think it's really important to put that out there and, in a sense, put it to bed. There are, of course, other pressing problems. Readiness is a big concern inside the military forces of our European allies. But the amount of resources that are being dedicated to defense, in my opinion, is not really the driving factor. And to the extent that that President Trump has and continues to beat that drum, causes me some misgivings about his commitment to the alliance going forward. I am concerned about that.
And I want to go to this. Did you have something you wanted to add, Yulia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that Romania was one of the first countries that took on increasing its defense budget. So this was already when President Iohannis took office in 2014. So it was way before the Trump administration, because Romania recognized the Russian threat and the need to do more for its own defense inside of NATO. So in 2015, there was a large agreement, a consensus among all the political parties in Romania to increase to 2% GDP, the defense budget. And now they made another agreement to increase to 2.5% that budget. And also there's this narrative. Yes, I agree. We have to dismantle it. During these times, we are in the middle of the electoral campaign for the European elections. And the subject of European defense is increasingly strong. There is a debate on how Europe now can do more for its own defense inside of the transatlantic bond. And I think this is a great improvement.
Right. Thank you. And we have a few minutes before we'll go to audience questions. So if you have some questions, get them ready. Brevity is always appreciated. I just want to go back to this point of part of the strategy is democratic resilience and the U.S. working with like-minded countries and how that really kind of fuels a lot of the strategy. And what are the risks of not prioritizing or having democratic resilience kind of fall among the discussions as we have these bigger issues of worries about Russia's use of nuclear weapons or kinetic conflict, things like that? How do we raise the importance of democratic resilience for Rich?
Well, Ian has already explained, I think, very well just the importance, not only the strategic importance, but the economic and commercial importance of this part of the world and this part of Europe. If we want those Black Sea states to improve their governance and their economic performance, which are really important to combating Russian influence, then I think we need to help them integrate with the West better than we have in the past. We put strenuous conditions on their integration into the European Union, in some cases into the Schengen zone, and even into NATO, probably for fear of upsetting the Russians. I think that policy has been shown to be a failure. The Ukraine war is, I think, pretty striking evidence of that. And so I think a different direction is probably warranted in this regard. To the extent that we can bring them more closely into the Western community, I think we would expect to see their economic performance and standard of living improve, the democratic governance inside those countries to improve. And this, in the long run, I think, along with this solution to the Ukraine crisis, would go far to stabilize the region.
If I could add, one of the most important elements in the Black Sea Strategy report that we're discussing is a section on communication strategy. We had a democratic renaissance, so to speak, globally, certainly in the returned parts of Europe after the end of the Cold War, across Central and Eastern Europe, in Georgia, in Ukraine, and to a certain degree in Russia. Well, things have changed, and one of the biggest changes has been the rise of information warfare. And we know the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and others are full bore on this. And their disinformation is permeating our societies. It's permeating the societies in Europe. We see the rise of right-wing parties. It's permeating our society here. We have got to go on offense as part of our strategy of democratic resilience. This is an offense which means leveraging the power of truth to underscore the benefits of democracy, the perils of authoritarianism. It should be part of the win strategy for Ukraine by going across the Russian border and informing the Russian people exactly what's going on, to wither their support against Putin and to wither their support against this war that Putin's running against Ukraine. That's got to be a key element of our strategy to reinforce democratic resilience, a little bit of offense.
Yes, a very important point in the Black Sea Strategy. One of those other kind of common sense ideas that I found in the report that looks like it would probably have a difficult time of implementation, just given democratic bureaucracies and the advantages that Russia and China do have. So now we will go to questions from the audience. And if there's anybody who in our live audience that wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand. We have a microphone. Okay, great. We have one person approaching the microphone.
Hi, Phil Dickinson from the Transatlantic Security Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for a fascinating session, really interesting, and for your work on the report. One of the elephants in the room, I suppose, to mix animal metaphors is Turkey. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the need for resetting relations with Turkey, obviously as a NATO ally, but with its own complicated relationship with Russia, and as a really essential strategic partner in the region. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that aspect.
Sure. Easier said than done to reset relations with Turkey. There's some real sticking points, U.S. support for the Kurds in the counter-ISIS campaign, and more generally has been a difficult obstacle to U.S. and Turkish relations bilaterally. Turkey has really ramped up its economic exchange and intercourse with Russia since the invasion in many ways. But it's also fair to point out, I think, that in general, Turkey itself has not been a destabilizing factor. It has not tried to destabilize its neighbors. It's of course economically dependent on Russian energy in a way that most other European states are freeing themselves from. But let's give Turkey some credit as well. It has restricted the movement of military naval vessels through the straits, but it's done that for the Russians as well as for NATO. And it has allowed commerce to flow more or less freely through the straits. So it's a mixed bag, if you will. The slide towards authoritarianism in Turkey is obviously a concern for Western democracies. But at the end of the day, Turkey is an essential, powerful Black Sea state. It's a NATO ally. It's going to be a reality for decades and decades to come. There will be a Turkey after Erdogan. And so I would argue that it's in everyone's interest to continue to try to forge the best possible relationship with Turkey, understanding the difficulties that are inherent in that.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one more question from the audience, sir.
Wayne Schroeder, I was a member of the task force along with Rich Hooker. Rich, thank you so much for your leadership in the report. It couldn't have really been done without Rich. I'd like to get to kind of a bottom line question, both for Rich and for Ian. How important is the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine war to the future options, security options that we have in the Black Sea region for Romania, for Bulgaria, for the other countries in the region? And if you could cut across all the domains, air, land, sea, cyber, and space.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Well, it's crucial. First of all, as the report points out, there's not going to be peace and security in the Black Sea region if this war continues, this Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, and certainly if Russia prevails in this conflict. I would add even more near term, the Washington summit that's coming up, because I think the outcome of this war is going to have a profound impact on the alliance. And I'm going to emphasize this point again. We have a war here in which one country with 1/25 of NATO's GDP, 1/10 of NATO's defense spending, and armed forces that come nowhere near the capabilities of NATO forces in terms of training, equipping, morale, capacity, and such. How is it that the alliance is unable to enable Ukraine to defeat this invasion decisively? It raises a lot of questions, not about the alliance's capability, but about the underlying political will upon which its ability, its effectiveness over the last 75 years to deter and to defend has rested upon. This war is raising questions about that political will because of the pure imbalance of power between the forces at play here. And that's going to be the defining context of the Washington summit. So this is going to be an inflection point for the alliance at this summit. It has got to ensure that Ukraine is on a path to victory if it wants to sustain in the long term confidence in its ability to deter and to defend. That's a lot at stake.
Yeah, and I feel that in Washington, maybe we're getting a sense that leading up to the NATO summit, there's this real hope and push to display unity and to display strength and to display super cooperation, but there's so much tension among allies because of competing interests and interest in the sense of what different countries think are the biggest priorities.
I can just add, I mean, steal Rich's thunder, but one of the most important elements in this strategy report, signed by two former SACEURs, is a warning that the West shouldn't allow itself to be over-deterred by Putin's threats of nuclear escalation. There's a very important section in there in which the report states that we have been self-deterred. We are exaggerating the risks of Putin's threats of nuclear escalation. There is more what we can do. We must not be self-deterred. It's important reading by, in a report that's chaired by two former Supreme Allied Commanders of Europe.
And then where's the gap in that kind of thinking and that kind of confidence in the Biden administration, in Germany, in other countries?
It's
Can I try to give a short response here, and then I'm looking at what we have to keep in mind is the underlying ideology that's behind Putin's actions. They don't see the world as we see, and I think that was an error, a strategic error that the West made. So if you looked at whole ideology rooted in Eurasianism, claiming the superiority of the Russian civilization, and framing the world as a fight between Russia and the West, the rejection of Western values, all that obsession with the Novorossiya and Ruski Mir, all of that is in the background for Putin, and it will continue to be. So we always have to have that in mind, and he will not stop until he gets inside of that ideology to the return of the sphere of influence that the Russian Empire and the USSR had.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to take some questions now from our virtual audience. And maybe Ian or Rich, maybe I'll start with you. What role do naval strategies and maritime cooperation play in bolstering defense measures in the Black Sea against potential adversaries? And maybe we can talk about the strategic role that Romania plays too.
Yeah, that's a tough question because the naval strength of NATO allies inside the Black Sea is not great. And of course, there are real constraints on the ability to bring NATO naval forces into the Black Sea because of the Montreux Convention and the position that Turkey has taken on that. So, and it's a real question. It's a real strategic question. Number one, because Russia has the ability almost at will to interdict grain supplies, exports through the Black Sea, which really have contributed to this international food crisis in a big way. They could dial up the pressure, they can dial down the pressure. The Ukrainian Navy, which has no large surface vessels left at all, has nevertheless done a tremendous job in pushing back the Russian Black Sea fleet and makes it difficult to operate in the Black Sea. Nevertheless, the ability to put sea mines out there and those sorts of things are a real concern. So there aren't obvious answers to how we can improve that situation other than perhaps providing anti-ship missiles and that kind of technology to Black Sea states that are allies of ours right now. But in a larger question, a successful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine is what will enable all the other measures that we discuss in the report. Ian's absolutely right about that. It's the overriding reason that the Black Sea region is not stable, and it won't be stable until we can solve that problem.
Let me make just a small suggestion. You know, NATO has essentially been flushed out of the Black Sea by Russia's military operations and threats. Turkey is a little bit complicit in that because it hasn't allowed NATO ships to come back in. An easy thing for NATO to do, it has the capacity, would be to fly in some patrol boats. Small patrol boats you can put on C-5s, drop them off the port of Constanza, and they could undertake countermining measures. That would be a way for NATO to demonstrate it's not being deterred. It would be a constructive role of NATO to kind of help open up the flow of commerce, even in a contested area. And if Turkey continued to block that, well, you could have a coalition of the willing to do it. And then eventually NATO would come along.
And what are the importance of American troops in Romania now? We've seen those numbers increase over the years. And is there any risk of those numbers going down? Or if we see a potential second Trump administration, he may decide to pull some troops out. What's the importance of the U.S. presence there?
Well, I think it's huge to have U.S. troops in some numbers salted all along the eastern flank. But it's going to be difficult to maintain a significant presence indefinitely. And that's another reason, an overriding reason, why showing progress on the ground towards a successful conclusion is important. Because the longer this conflict goes on, the greater the chances that popular support and the will to carry on will erode. I think that's very clear. So we don't have forever to get to a successful outcome. If things don't change in a pretty significant way, we may be headed towards another frozen conflict, as we've seen in Georgia, as we see in Moldova. And what that means is that Russia is now in a position to regroup and commit aggression in other places as well, which I personally believe would be more likely than not.
Yulia, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I think it's critical to keep the presence of NATO troops in countries like Romania. There is a project now developing in MK base near Constanza to have the biggest NATO base in Europe, hosting more than 10,000 NATO soldiers. But I agree with what my fellow panelists said. We don't want to run out of time. The pressure is going to increase.
You know, Laura, if I could, to answer your question on what happens if Trump comes into office and how to prevent that withdrawal from happening, there are two things the Europeans can do. They can beef up, particularly the West Europeans, they can beef up their deployments to NATO's eastern frontier. We have 60,000 troops permanently stationed in Europe. We've added to that 40,000 troops whose primary focus is to reinforce that eastern frontier. The West Europeans in total don't come up close to 40,000 troops. They need to do more on NATO's eastern frontier. And the best way to ensure that Trump doesn't, quote unquote, sell away Ukraine or withdraw forces is for Europe to do whatever it can to ensure that before Trump comes into office, Ukraine is on a clear path to victory. Because I can tell you one thing, if Ukraine isn't on a clear path to victory, it's going to reinforce all his perceptions, his assertions, his belief that Europe is feckless, not willing to stand up for its own responsibility, it's using the United States. If Ukraine is on a winning track, he's going to be want to be part of the winning team. That's how you keep those troops there.
Yes, but can Ukraine get on a winning track over the next couple of months before the election, given the delay in the supplemental and the unlikelihood that more aid from the U.S. would be coming?
Well, there's a question of whether the U.S. aid will be coming and how it comes. But the question is, we have the capacity to put Ukraine onto a clear path to victory, I would argue, even before the NATO summit. We just have to commit the resources and show the political will.
Okay, okay. Wow, let's figure that one out. We have just a few minutes left, and so maybe just some kind of closing remarks, again, focusing on the NATO summit here in July. What are going to be the things that you want to, from each panelist, maybe quickly, the most important points you want to see come out, maybe your fears of what won't be said and what the danger could be. So, Yulia, we can start with you, if you don't mind.
So I can put it as a hope or as a fear. So one thing I hope to see is for sure a priority on the Black Sea and acknowledging the importance of allocating resources and investing in the Black Sea security. And the other thing I would like to see is a more bold and clear pathway for Ukraine NATO membership. We need to go beyond the Vilnius summit, beyond the declaration after the Vilnius summit.
And the fear is that those two things...
That will not happen. That's the fear, yes, like there would be a reluctance or a cautiousness that's my fear, so.
Right, thank you. Okay, Rich?
So I think for sure the number one objective at the summit will be to project and demonstrate unity and cohesion across the alliance. That said, there is a real cleavage. The perception of threat and the understanding of what needs to be done among the Nordics, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania is quite different from the perception the farther west you go. Not only is the threat perception different, but the willingness to put resources against that challenge is different as well. And until that's resolved, it's going to be difficult to get true unity in solving this problem. But it is a problem that can be solved. Ian's enumerated for you the difference in terms of just power and resources available to the alliance versus Russia. The wherewithal is there. The real question is the political will.
The key objective at the Washington summit is to put Ukraine on a clear path to victory, and that's going to require 5 things from the alliance. Adoption of Ukraine's war aims. That means total territorial reconstitution. Anything short of that's disillusionment to Ukraine and emboldens Putin. Second, the flow, an aggressive flow of weapons to Ukraine. And you know the list, artillery, planes, and such, without restrictions on their use, so they can be used to hit legitimate targets in Russia. Real economic sanctions. The fact that Russia grew by 3% last year shows the inadequacy of our sanctions regime. A real communications campaign to weaponize the power of truth, to turn the Russian people against Putin and against this war. And then finally, as Yulia pointed out, a clear path with an end state for Ukrainian membership in NATO. Ukrainian membership for NATO should be part of the win strategy, in addition to being a strategy for securing the peace after this war is over, and one on Ukraine's terms.
And what are your hopes that some of that list, all of that list, will be prioritized, will be addressed in the public statements by leaders at the summit?
That's all I hope about. I mean, that's what I dream about happening. And what really hurts me is I know we have the capacity to do it. The question is, do we have the political will and leadership necessary to lev the capacity into action? We do that, Ukraine will win. It will win on its terms. It will win decisively, and it will win fast.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I want to thank our wonderful panelists. I want to thank the Atlantic Council. This was really, I think, a rich discussion, and it's been a pleasure to moderate this event. And I encourage you all to stay engaged with the Atlantic Council as they continue their campaign in the lead up to the 2024 NATO summit. Stay engaged, stay watching. It will be interesting. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, well done.
Are we off? Yes. Laura, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Laura. That was lovely. Great job.
Thanks. Did I miss something?
High energy moderator.
Greetings, everyone. I'm honored to present closing remarks after such a substantial debate, which actually makes my job really easy. Allow me to acknowledge the excellent partnership between the Atlantic Council and the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Romania and the leadership of Fred Kemp and Rector Ramos Pricopie to recognize the strategic profile of the Black Sea region and be instrumental in enhancing the debate around it. Word of gratitude goes to the co-chairs of the Atlantic Council, Black Sea Task Force, General Jones and General Scaperotti, and Task Force Director Richard Hooker, as well as the whole task force that drafted the report and advanced policy recommendations. The report and debate are timely as we head towards the NATO summit in July. As President Iohannis outlined last week in his meeting with President Biden at the White House, Romania will continue to consistently support Ukraine as long as necessary, and our joint priority for Europe and for the United States remains the same, to not let Russia win this war against Ukraine. Yes. Allow me to also outline President Biden's appreciation for Romania's leadership, especially in the Black Sea, as well as the United States' commitment to stand with Romania. The United States' commitment towards the Black Sea region has been taking great shape. First of all, the decisive congressional action that was taken in 2022 and 2023, including the National Defense Authorization Act and the leadership of Senators Shaheen, Ricketts, Wicker, Durbin, and many others, as well as Representatives Turner, Keating, and the list goes on. Secondly, through the dynamic debate in the think tank environment here in Washington, and I would like to emphasize the role of the Atlantic Council being one of the first trailblazers that played this role. Last but not least, through the State Department United States strategy on the Black Sea region. This foundation has set the stage for the United States Comprehensive National Security Council directed interagency strategy on the Black Sea region as mandated by the National Defense Authorization Act at the end of last year. This remains essential for robust engagement in the region on security, economy, energy, democratic resilience, rule of law, and for allocating the appropriate resources in that regard with the aim to ensure a free, open, secure, democratic, and last but not least, prosperous region. Why it is so important, this strategy? Such a strategy will continue to be a source of vitality and inspiration for allies as well as for NATO and beyond. Thank you, the Atlantic Council and the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration for continuing to make a strong case in that regard. Thank you all.